The military of New France consisted of a mix of regular soldiers of the French Army, French Navy and Canadiens volunteer militia units, supported by independent American Indian Allies. Prior to 1690, most French troops were sent from France, but challenges of logistics and localization meant that by 1690, the number of Canadian volunteers increased relative to the number of professional troops, and by the 1720s Canadiens dominated military service. Installations. The French and Canadians built forts from Newfoundland to Louisiana and others captured from the British from the 1600s to the late 1700s. Some were a mix of military post and trading forts. Château St. Louis, built 1648 with 16 redoubts, rebuilt and finally destroyed by fire 1834. Citadel of Quebec 1673 to 1872. The Citadel, Montreal 1690 to 1821. Fortress of Louisbourg, Acadie 1720 to 1758, destroyed in 1760 and partially rebuilt in the 1960s as a historic museum. Port Royal, Acadie 1605 to 1613. Fort Anne 1636 to 1713. Fort Beauharnois 1727. Fort Beauséjour 1751 to 1835. Fort Bachebot before 1696 to 1751. Fort Bonsecours 1685. Fort Bourbon 1684, captured 1692 and captured by French several times and returned 1713. Fort Carillon 1755 to 1759. Fort Chambly 1675 to 1776. Fort Champlain. Fort Coulon. Fort Crèvecoeur 1687 to 1701. Fort Dauphin 1741. Fort de la Montagne, Mont-Royal 1685, Quebec and home to Governor, mostly destroyed by fire of 1854. Fort du Sceau St. Louis 1725. Fort Duville 1720 to 1730. Fort Duquesne 1754 to 1758. Fort Frontenac 1673 to 1758, rebuilt 1783. Fort Gaspereau 1751 to 1756. Fort Kaministiquia. Fort La Base 1717 to 1760. Fort La Biche 1753 to 1757. Fort La Reine 1738. Fort Le Boeuf 1753 to 1763. Fort Lachine 1672 to 1873, and site of Lachine massacre, abandoned 1825 and destroyed 1873. Fort de la Corne 1753. Fort La Jonquière 1751. Fort La Pointe 1693 to 1759. Fort La Prairie 1687 to 1713, site of the Battle of La Prairie 1691. Fort La Reine 1738 to 1852. Fort La Suisse 1695. Fort Macos 1754 to 1763. Fort Maurepas 1734. Fort Meneguchi 1751 to 1755. Fort Miami 1679 to 1680. Fort des Miamis 1702 to 1760. Fort Michilimackinac 1715 to 1780. Fort Michipicoton 1725 to 1904. Fort Nashwauk 1692 to 1700. Fort Niagara 1726. Fort Ouiatenon 1717 to 1791. Fort Pasquoya 1741. Fort Pentagoet 1613 to 1674. Fort Pimicouas 1691 to 1812. Fort Pontchartrain du Detroit 1701–1796. Fort Presqu'Isle 1753–1852. Fort Richelieu 1665. Fort Royal 1687–1713. Fort Rouge 1738–1741. Fort Saint-Anne 1686–1693. Fort Saint-Antoine 1686–1731. Fort St. Charles 1732. Fort St. Croix 1683. Fort Saint-Jacques 1686–1713. Fort Saint-Jean-le-Vallée du Richelieu 1666, destroyed 1760 and rebuilt by British in 1775 and had small shipyard. Fort St. Joseph 1691–1795. Fort St. Nicholas 1685. Fort St. Pierre 1731–1812. Fort Saint-Auste 1747–1763. Fort Senville 1671–1691, 1692–1776. Fort Tourette 1683–1763. Fort Trempealeau 1685–1731. Fort Verchières 1672. Fort Vincennes 1731–1766. Fort Ville-Marie 1642–74, demolished 1688. Units: French Army Canadiens Saliers Regiment, Volunteer Army Unit François Cotonneau de Champleria, a member of this unit and ancestor of Piemsler Wilfrid Laurier Regiment Suisse de Cara 1722–1745, 1747, 1749, 176 soldiers and 4 officers 1740s. P. Canadian Voyages, Militia Unit Reserve Company 1750s. The Governor-General's Guard 1672, 1682, Mounted Men-at-Arms Carabiniers for Comte de Frontenac. Compagnie des Canonniers Bombardiers de Quebec 1750–1760 consisted of 43 gunners, bombers Regiment Lassar 1755–1760. Regiment d'Artois 1755, 1760, 520 soldiers. Regiment de Cambies 1758–680 soldiers. 2 companies Maréchaussée, police unit. French Navy 28 Compagnies Franchise de la Marine 1683, 1755, 30 companies 1750s with 1,500 soldiers and 120 officers. Compagnies Franchise de la Marine of Acadia 4 companies with 200 soldiers and 12 officers by 1702. Compagnies Franchise de la Marine of Plaisance 3 companies with 150 soldiers and 9 officers by the 1690s. Compagnies Franchise de la Marine on Isle Royal 1710s 24 companies with 1,200 soldiers and 96 officers by 1749. Bombardiers de la Marine 1702–1760s 108 Bombardiers Troops de la Marine 1682, 1755, 1759, 1,000 soldiers. Galley Troops, Canadian Militia District of Quebec 1759–5,640 Militiamen District of Montreal 1759–5,455 Militiamen 4,200 sent to Quebec City. District of Trois-Rivières 1759–1,300 Militiamen 1,100 to Quebec City. Canadian Cavalry 200 cavalrymen. Acadian Militia 1759–150 militians. Native Indians 1759–1,800. Military strategy. The soldiers of New France were either exceptionally well trained and very apt to the challenges of the colonial frontier, or they were dangerously inept. Most of the military consisted of habitant militia rather than actual French soldiers. Upon their arrival, the soldiers of New France learned quickly that the traditional military techniques seen on the battlefields of Europe were not at all effective in the New World. The Iroquois attacks on the French forced them to adapt to the current situation. Luckily, the French were experts on forging alliances with the native people, and with the help from their allies, the French adopted what they call la petite guerre. This was essentially small-scale guerrilla warfare that allowed the French to harass and cripple targets slowly over time rather than engage in battle after battle, something that New France could not afford. The strategies consisted mostly of stealth and surprise attacks whose purpose lied in creating ambushes and raids, and followed by immediate withdrawals from the battlefield. This strategy focused on the elimination of small groups of targets rather than capturing targets of strategic value. In addition, this style of warfare was not only well suited to the North American wilderness, but it also allowed the French troops to be at a vast numerical disadvantage and still effectively retaliate against their enemies, primarily the British. Ironically, the fact that most of the soldiers were in fact habitant militiamen actually aided in the ability to fight using these strategies, given that many of these men would have been hunters and would already be accustomed to hunting and stalking in forests. Native relationships. Native allies. It was the job of the military to maintain good relations with frontier Native Americans in order to preserve French interests in the colony. In fact, preserving a positive relationship between the French and native peoples was the most important of the duties that were given to the military. Throughout the years, the French developed ties with several native tribes. Those allies consisted mainly of the Abenakis, Algonquin, Huron, Montagnais, and Outaouais, and through the partnership they taught them much more than just military strategy. They taught them how to hunt, fish and dress the catches, and they taught them how to navigate and essentially survive in the unforgiving Canadian wilderness. The French soldiers relied heavily on the native warriors, but their allegiance came at a cost. The natives were self-interested and attached themselves only to the one who gives them the most. If they failed to be rewarded one single time, the good that was done for them before counts for nothing. In addition, the natives as tribes provided knowledge of the wilderness, but the tribes themselves were not active in the wars as a whole. Native warriors participated in the French battles if they chose to do so, usually under the arrangement that they would be compensated for their participation. Falling short on these agreements sometimes caused great discourse amongst the natives and sometimes damaged French-native relationships. Decadence amongst the soldiers. Part of the job of the military was to create good trade relations with the natives. New France relied heavily on the fur trade, given that it was the only valuable commodity in the entire colony, which cost more to operate than it brought in profit. However, much of the military hierarchy was not based on merit but rather on internal family connections, which allowed unqualified, young, ambitious and greedy men to take positions of high rank. This resulted in many soldiers leaving the post for weeks at a time in order to illegally trade with the natives. The natives had an understanding of how the trading system worked and considered the military as trading goods chiefs, and because of their dereliction of duty came to recognize many soldiers as dishonest people who went against their code. In addition, there were even times where the presents the king would send to keep friendly relations with the natives were often taken and sold to them for profit instead. The only presents they would give them would be mere trinkets. Therefore, the lack of discipline amongst some of the higher-ups resulted in losing face amidst the natives and subsequently losing some of the business and their allegiance to the English. Military commanders. Louis-Joseph de Montcalm, Chevalier de L'Écutvillais, Louis-Antoine de Bougainville, François-Charles de Bourlamaque, Claude-Pierre Picardy de Contrecoeur, Marquis de Denonville, Jean-Daniel Dumas, Daniel Léonard de Beaujeu, Louis Coulon de Villiers, Chevalier de la Corne, Charles Lemoyne, Joseph-François Hertel de la Fresnière, French Royal Navy, Jean Vauquelin, Duc d'Anville, Joseph de Beaufremont, Comte de la Galissonière, Pierre Lemoyne d'Iberville, Louis Charles du Chaffel de Besnay, Marquis de la Jonquière, Dubois de la Motte, Alcide 64 guns, l'Algonquin 74 guns, Bienfaisant 64 guns, Bourgogne, Dauphin Royal 74 guns, Diadem 74 guns, Duc de Bourgogne 74 guns, Fantasque 64 guns, Formidable 80 guns, Acutare 74 guns, Lamaco 32 guns, Orient 80 guns, Pelican 44 guns, Reasonable 64 guns, Tonnant 84 guns. Ships built in New France. A list of ships posted to New France. Le Temperature. Shipbuilding in New France 1650s and repair facilities were available in Quebec and Louisbourg. Ships built in Quebec shipyard include 500-ton store ship launched on June 4, 1742. Caribou, a 700-ton store ship launched on May 13, 1744. Castor, a 26-gun frigate launched on May 16, 1745. Carcajou, a 12-gun corvette built in 1744–45. Martyr, a 22-gun frigate launched on June 6, 1746. St. Laurent, a 60-gun vessel launched on June 13, 1748. Original of 60-gun vessel, sank when launched on September 2, 1750. Algonquin, a 72-gun ship launched in June 1753. Abenakis, a 30-gun frigate launched in the spring of 1756. 30-gun frigate begun in 1756 but not completed. Weapons. Muskets, light hunting musket by militia units, flintlock muskets by Marines, matchlock muskets with bayonets by Marines, swords, pike used by pikemen, hatchet used by militiamen, halberd, military commanders. Louis Joseph de Montcalm, Chevalier de l'Écutvillais, Louis Antoine de Bougainville, François Charles de Bourlamaque, Claude Pierre Pécordy de Contrecoeur, Marquis de Denonville, Jean-Daniel Dumas, Daniel Léonard de Beaujeu, Louis Coulon de Villiers, Chevalier de la Corne, Charles Lemoyne, Joseph-François Hertel de la Fresnière, French Royal Navy, Jean Vauquelin, Duc d'Anville, Joseph de Beaufremont, Comte de la Galissonière, Pierre Lemoyne d'Iberville, Louis Charles du Chaffel de Besnay, Marquis de la Jonquière, Dubois de la Motte, Alcide 64 guns, l'Algonquin 74 guns, Bienfaisant 64 guns, Bourgogne, Dauphin Royal 74 guns, Diadem 74 guns, Duc de Bourgogne 74 guns, Fantasque 64 guns, Formidable 80 guns, Acutare 74 guns, Lamaco 32 guns, Orient 80 guns, Pelican 44 guns, Reasonable 64 guns, Tonnant 84 guns. Ships built in New France. A list of ships posted to New France. Le Temperature. Shipbuilding in New France 1650s and repair facilities were available in Quebec and Louisbourg. Ships built in Quebec shipyard include 500-ton store ship launched on June 4, 1742. Caribou, a 700-ton store ship launched on May 13, 1744. Castor, a 26-gun frigate launched on May 16, 1745. Carcajou, a 12-gun corvette built in 1744–45. Martyr, a 22-gun frigate launched on June 6, 1746. St. Laurent, a 60-gun vessel launched on June 13, 1748. Original of 60-gun vessel, sank when launched on September 2, 1750. Algonquin, a 72-gun ship launched in June 1753. Abenakis, a 30-gun frigate launched in the spring of 1756. 30-gun frigate begun in 1756 but not completed. Weapons: muskets, light hunting musket by militia units, flintlock muskets by Marines, matchlock muskets with bayonets by Marines, swords, pike used by pikemen, hatchet used by militiamen, halberd